All right, guys. So today we're going to take a little bit of notes on different economic systems. Essentially, for our sake, we're going to use three different systems. Okay. And then we'll kind of explain a little bit more of that. But you can kind of put everything into one of these categories. All right. The first one is a traditional economy. Now, remember, economy just means how people trade goods and services. So, how do you get your food or housing or somebody to paint your house or whatever you can think of? So, a traditional economy, just think really old school, okay, long time ago, generally. Um, a traditional economy is sort of primitive. They don't use money. Now, money essentially just means a medium of exchange. Okay. And we don't mean medium as in small, medium, large. We mean medium as a way to go between something. Okay. So let's say, for example, you live on a farm and you have a bunch of chickens, but you really want a cow. Well, today you would just get some money and buy a cow. But that's because money is a medium of exchange. So you have chickens and they have cows, but you use money to facilitate the exchange. You don't simply use the chickens for the cows. But if you don't have money, that's how you have to trade things. And then that can be kind of tricky because what if the person that has cows doesn't want any chickens? Well, then maybe you have to trade your chickens for a goat, and then the goat you trade for a cow or something like that. But then that gets confusing because a goat's a lot smaller than a cow. So it can be tricky in a traditional economy. Okay, you just trade things for what you need. You don't use money as a medium of exchange. It works on a smaller scale. I'm sure you have traded things all the time. I'm sure at lunch you might trade your extra food for somebody else's extra food. But on a large scale, you really can't get away without having some medium of exchange, some kind of money. And money generally needs to be something that is durable and fungible, meaning you can exchange, like, for example, fungible means it's not exactly the same thing, but it works just as well. So if you give somebody $1 and they give you 4 quarters, then that's fine. Or if they give you $1 and then you get a different dollar bill, it doesn't have to be the exact dollar bill. If somebody says you owe me $5, they don't literally mean you need to give them the exact $5 that you had. Just any $5 will do. And then money needs to be divisible so you can divide it into smaller bits. You don't want to just have money that's only one. If we only had $100 bills, that wouldn't be very good. So the earliest types of money would be shells or things like that. But then gold became a pretty good use of money because if gold is hard to kind of fake, you can cut gold into smaller amounts, and it's pretty durable. So the traditional economy, the next bullet point here is that it's centered around family or tribe. Okay, so it's not centered around international trade or anything like that. Okay, it's a family or a tribe. So traditional economy, you might have a small group of families that live somewhere, and they kind of just all work together, and that's fine. They get along pretty well just that way because they don't have to have a lot of trade. But you can only get so wealthy that way. Okay, and that's fine to a degree, but you're not going to have any great inventions and things like that with just a simple traditional economy. There's almost no surplus. What that means is, most farmers don't farm just for their families. They farm and then they end up feeding lots and lots of people. Okay, so farmers have a surplus, extra. Okay, so in a traditional economy, there's really no surplus. Okay, you grow enough food for yourself, or you might cut down enough wood for a house for yourself, but you don't try to make a bunch extra. So there's no surplus. Now, it exists in nomadic or hunter-gatherer society. So nomadic means they move around. They don't have a set, they don't have a set home where they build a nice stone or brick house and stay there forever and pass it down through generations. They would, go somewhere, get what they need. Oh, not time to go. Oh, it's getting cold. Let's go south. Oh, it's getting hot. Let's go north. or hunter gatherers, which hunter gatherers might not necessarily be nomadic, but they're not, you know, using agriculture. You'll learn about that next year. But yeah, it's a pretty simple system. So with agriculture, generally you're not going to grow just enough corn for yourself. You're generally going to grow a little extra, and hey, I can trade my corn for your sweet potatoes or whatever else, and then, well, you start doing that, and then you move on to the next level of an economy. It eventually turns into a more advanced economy. Not all the time, but that's generally what happens. Okay, so Europe, Asia, all these places that have advanced economies now, they originally had traditional economies. Now there are some places that still have a traditional economy, but they're generally pretty isolated places. So places in South America, in the rainforest, there's Sentinel Island in the Pacific, where if you even try to go there, they'll kill you, and they essentially live like people lived 10,000, 20,000 years ago. So it's very, very basic. And you can get along fine there, but it's not very advanced. So if you break your leg, you're not going to be able to get medicine for that or anything. So as long as you're healthy, it's okay. Um, so Native American tribes before Europe would be an example of a traditional economy, and then Sentinelese. And if you want to go check that out and read something about the Sentinelese, it's actually pretty interesting how they've essentially not let anybody go to that little island. Um, and it's pretty interesting. So if you want to go check that out, that's something you can check out and then come back and finish your notes. So this would be an Inuit of northern Canada. They're a traditional economy. So they fish, they hunt a little bit, but they don't have agriculture up there. But it's very simple. Okay, they're not working jobs 9 to 5, working for somebody else or anything like that. It's a very traditional economy because traditionally that's how economies work. Economies have only changed, the last, depending on where you're at, 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000 years, something like that. Okay. Now, next is a command economy. Now, a command economy is an economy that the state plans everything. Okay. So the state would say, all right, we need to make this many bushels of corn this year. We need to have this many cars made. We need to have this many dishwashers made. We need to have this many pairs of sneakers, this many socks. I mean, all of that is planned by the government. And the reason they do that is they think it's more efficient that way. Okay. Um, I've heard people complain that there's too many types of deodorant. Because why are we wasting time having people compete over who makes deodorant? Should we use those resources on feeding the poor, something like that? So in a command economy, okay, the word there is command. The government commands people to do what they're supposed to do. So you don't get to just say, "Hey, I want to start my own yogurt shop." You can't do that. All right, that was my alarm to sign in. If you heard that. So the state allocates the resources. Okay, you don't get to say, I want to go buy this for my own purposes. No, the state would be in charge of that. Okay, the state would own all businesses. So you might work for a yogurt shop, for example, but the state would own the yogurt shop and say all the flavors and all that. So you would be an employee of the state. There's no private ownership. You can't just say, hey, I want to own this and make money off of it. You can't do that. Okay. You're not allowed to have private property. You could have personal property. So the businesses have to follow state regulations. So again, you could have a yogurt shop that you work at, but you don't get to make the decisions. The state would make the rules, and you just have to follow what they say. So there's no private businesses. Now the examples would be North Korea, the Soviet Union, USSR, or parts of the U.S. during war. Now, even in North Korea today, there are examples where they have what they would call black market. So a black market would be a market that is not approved by the government. So there's black markets in all sorts of things. So people who sell drugs, that's a black market. But you can have black market in all sorts of things. So in North Korea, they have black markets in things that we don't even conceive of. So they would have a black market in entertainment because they're not allowed to watch certain movies. So if somebody could sneak the movie in, there could be a black market for that. Now the issue there is the punishment is very severe. Okay, you can have a black market in something but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get in a whole lot of trouble for it. I'm surprised there's not a black market for oops passes. If somebody doesn't use their oops passes and they say, you know what, I'm going to give it to somebody I want to have their ice cream sandwich today, I'll give them an oops pass. Well, that would kind of be like a black market. It wouldn't be an official approved market. Soviet Union, same kind of thing. Once Lenin took over, they had a command economy. Now, the U.S., that might seem strange to see that on there. See the U.S. with North Korea and USSR, and there's Cuba's another one. China, sort of. I mean, China's actually a command economy in a lot of ways, but they've loosened up a lot in the last several decades. But the U.S. during war, for example, in the 1940s, during World War II, the government would say, all right, factories, you're no longer making cars, you're making Jeeps. So you're no longer making cars, you're going to make airplanes. Or you're no longer making this, you're making that. So the government took over segments of the economy to create things for the war effort. So that would be a command economy. And the U.S. did that in a lot of ways, okay? In a lot of ways. They actually did that during part of the Great Depression because the state, U.S. government was trying to determine, how many hogs should be raised, how much corn should be grown, all these things, how much should people be paid. There's actually an interesting story during the Great Depression. There was a guy who was actually put in jail because he charged too little for dry cleaning. So they got to the point where during the Great Depression, the U.S. government had all these rules, and one of them was you can't charge too little for dry cleaning. Actually, the government told people, you have to charge this much for your dry cleaning. And if you don't follow those rules, you can actually get in trouble. The U.S. does a little bit of that today. For example, you can't have a business and pay someone less than what the government says you have to pay them. So if somebody wants to work for you for $6 an hour, the government says you're not allowed to do that. But generally, by and large, you can kind of do what you want. There's rules and regulations on almost everything we do in America, but generally, you can kind of do what you want. So you can open up a store, you can start a business, things like that. So we're not a complete command economy. We do have some aspects of it, and sometimes it's worse than others. So this would be an example of a command economy. So I can't remember where this picture was taken, but if you look at it, it looks to be something like Russian to me, because you can see the writing at the top there. So they're waiting in line because whatever product they need, the government's in charge of handing it out. So somebody can't say, hey, we need bread, I'm going to go have my own bakery. You're not allowed to do that. You have to follow what the government dictates. And so that tends to lead to lines because remember we talked about earlier that prices are information. And so if something's starting to run low, the price would tend to go up. And if the price goes up, people realize that, hey, there's not enough of this. So other people might start trying to sell it. So that's how prices work. But under a command economy, you don't really have prices. So it's hard for people to figure out, hey, do we have enough food or shoes or whatever things people want? We might not have enough of it. Okay. All right. So a market economy. Now, a market economy is when all property is privately owned. Okay. Now, we don't have a market economy, but we're close. Okay. So all property is privately owned. You're most likely, if you're taking these notes right now, you're taking these notes not in private property, in government property, okay, because it's a school, it's run by the government. But in a market economy, there would still be schools, obviously, but the market for education would be different than it is today. So there's competition between businesses. So, Yogurt Mountain wants to get some business from Yogurt Lab, or McDonald's wants to get business from Chick-fil-A or vice versa. So businesses compete against each other. So in a command economy, competition is not what you're looking for. Okay? You're working at, I wouldn't necessarily say cooperation because it's one big amalgamation of people, but competition is not what you do. Although competition sometimes gets a bad rap, but it's really cooperation. But you do want to compete. So you want to get customers from somebody else. And the benefit for that is if you have to compete for customers, you're going to do a good job. But if you know you don't have to compete, maybe you do a good job, maybe you don't, but it doesn't really impact what happens because people don't really have an option. So um, people like oftentimes will use the example of the DMV. And sometimes you go to the DMV and everybody's really nice, and sometimes they're not. But it doesn't really matter how they act because you have to go there anyway. Because the DMV is part of the government's monopoly on uh, transportation and licensing and things like that. But you you have competition between businesses, which generally leads to better quality because you can always say, I don't like this, I want to use something else. Whereas if the government's the only one that sells a product or gives a product away or under a command economy, you really don't have any options. You can't take your business elsewhere. Okay. Prices are used to allocate resources. So that's the problem. That's the socialist calculation problem under a command economy is how do you allocate resources? How in the world do you figure out how much of each product should be sold and what should be made from what? For example, the desk you're probably sitting in right now is not made from solid gold. Okay, it's made from probably laminate wood and some plastic and some metal. Why is it not made from gold? Well, gold's pretty sturdy. Why don't we do that? Well, um, the reason is because gold is lower in supply. There's not that much gold in the whole world. There's really not. And so gold has a small supply, has a high demand. And because we have prices tell us gold's expensive. So we don't want to make desks out of gold because we probably wouldn't be able to have desks, outside of Simmons Middle School made with gold because there's just not that much gold in the world. And so we don't use gold for that. We use it for something else because prices tell you that. So when people are trying to make desks to sell, they say, what's the best product? Okay. And maybe wood is cheaper, but wood's not as sturdy. Okay. Maybe gold is it's not really that sturdy, but if gold was sturdier, or titanium, I guess, if we're going to use titanium for the desk, well, titanium is really expensive. So we don't use titanium. Titanium gets used for something else. Or diamonds. Diamonds is sturdy, sturdy, sturdy. Okay? Diamonds are super duper sturdy, but we don't make our desks out of diamonds because diamonds have other uses. How do we know what they're used for? Well, prices help tell us. So that's how we figure out what we need to use things for. Okay, if the price of something goes really low, that's information. If the price is really high, that's information. The state's role in a market economy is essentially that of a referee. Okay, so if you've got a company that is breaking the law, well, the government's job is to enforce the law, but the law is essentially there to make sure people play fair. Okay. Now, the example for market economy is none. There's no economy, and even with the USSR and all that, they're not. The Soviet Union, North Korea was not purely a command economy. There's still black markets going on, but that's kind of how they created it. Okay. The U.S. during war, there was still market economy aspects of it, but there were certain parts that were definitely command economy. So there's no pure market economy anywhere, but there's aspects of it all around us. Okay, where you can do what you want with your stuff. So, if you have $1, you can buy what you want with it. Okay, go to maybe you want to buy a soda from the Shell station, or maybe you want to buy it from the Exxon station. Well, there's competition right there. Prices are how you allocate resources. So when you go to get something, well, the water bottle is $1, and then the Gatorade is $2. Well, the prices will tell you information, and then you can figure out how to allocate your resources for that. If there was no price difference between a 12-ounce Coke and a 2-liter Coke, well, how would you know which one's more? Everybody would just get the bigger one. Okay, so prices give you information. All right. So there's no pure market economy, but there are aspects of it all around us. All right. So this is a picture. I like this picture. I like to go down the Coke aisle sometimes because I'm weird, and I like to look at all the different types of soda. Okay. And there's a lot more than this. So this one, you have regular Coca-Cola. Okay. You have Coke Zero. You have Diet Coke, and you have Coca-Cola Light. Okay, and the Coca-Cola Light Life has a different type of sweetener. I think it's stevia or stevia or something like that. And then Diet Coke has, I want to say aspartame. It's got a certain type of sweetener. So none of these sodas actually have real sugar. I wish I had a picture that had all the different examples, but you've got the red Coke can. That's sort of regular Coke, but it's made with corn syrup. But you can go some places and get the regular Coke that's made with real sugar. It tastes better, in my opinion. But then they came out with Diet Coke, which the sugar was replaced with a fake sugar, and so it didn't have calories. So you could drink it, and it tasted good, but it didn't have any calories. Okay, all these sodas are not really good for you health wise in terms of getting nutrients. But they said, well, at least with the Diet Coke, I'm not getting my 150 calories from a can of Coke. But some people didn't like Diet Coke. Um, some people just didn't like the taste as much, and also it got to the point where most people thought Diet Coke was more of a female drink for whatever reason, and so they said, well, let's come out with Coke Zero. So they came out with Coke Zero, which is in a black can, and it's marketed a little bit differently, and it has a little different sweetener. Okay, and then you have Coke Life, and then now they have vanilla Coke, they have caffeine-free Coke, so they also have orange Coke, cherry Coke. So, you can go there and get Coke, Diet Coke, Coke Zero, Coke Life, Diet Coke Life, or Diet Cherry Coke, Vanilla Coke, Cherry Vanilla Coke, Orange Coke, and there's like 50 million flavors. And there's also like 50 million sizes too. You can get the little tiny, I don't know, 8-ounce cans, and you can get the 12-ounce cans, you can get the 16-ounce bottles, 20-ounce bottles, liter, 2 liter, liter and a half. There's all these different sizes you can get. And so that's because of a market economy, okay? Because Coca-Cola wants to, I wouldn't say pander, but they want to work with, try to get compete against Pepsi and companies like that to get the business. So they have to do that. Okay, that's one of the reasons you see lots of advertising. For example, Soviet Union, North Korea, they don't really have advertising like we think of it, because it's like, okay, well, if you need this product, well, the government's going to provide it, so we don't really need to advertise it and say, use this product versus this product. Whereas if you watch regular TV shows and you see commercials, the commercials will tell you, drink Coke, not Pepsi, drink Bud Light, not Coors Light, and eat McDonald's, not Burger King, and all this other stuff. Well, they don't do that in a command economy because you don't have options. All right. This is an interesting picture here. So this picture is showing what percent of people were living in extreme poverty. I think a lot of times people don't realize that life is actually getting a lot better. So if you go back to 1820, so almost 200 years ago, if you go back 200 years ago, you'll see that almost everybody, the red is the extreme poverty. Almost everybody was in extreme poverty in 1820. Okay. So if you look at the top there, extreme poverty is defined as living at a consumption or income level below 1.9 international dollars a day. So pretty much under $2 a day. Okay. So that's like $700 a year. All right. Really not much money at all. And they try to adjust for all sort of different, because lots of countries don't use the dollar. So they have to kind of figure out how to do that. But anyway, they came up with a system. And they say, okay, well, most people in 1820, and there's only a billion people, most people were living in what we call extreme poverty. Okay. Yeah, there were like rich kings and stuff like that in certain places, but the average person was a dirt poor farmer, farming and barely getting by. And you'll notice as the Industrial Revolution kicked up, then that number went, the number of people not living in poverty went up. And you can see, especially in places like India and China, you can't really tell from this, but places like India and China, the percent of people that were in extreme poverty has dropped. Okay. Because for a while, the amount of people living in extreme poverty went up a little bit, but that's because the whole population was going up. And you see now we have over 7 billion people, and 80% of them, more than that now, but a lot of them are not in extreme poverty. Okay. And so we're slowly eliminating extreme poverty, which is good. Okay. That's a good thing. We don't want to have a lot of poor folks that are having a hard time getting by. All right, this is the last thing you have to write down. So under a mixed economy, and that's pretty much most countries. It's a combination of the other forms of economy. So property is private, but regulated by the state. Okay. Um, Most every economy is a mixed economy, but some are more command or more market, and in some places are more command in certain aspects than other places. In some ways, Finland is much more of a command economy than America, but in other ways, it's more of a market economy than America. And so it kind of just sort of depends on the country. So it can be hard to say this country is more of a command economy or communist or socialist, whatever word you want to use, depending on what part of the spectrum you want to use there. But most every country, USSR, which doesn't exist anymore, was essentially command economy. North Korea, but there, almost every country is some degree of mixed economy. So the U.S. is a mixed economy. We have private property, but you can't say I want to hire somebody for $5 an hour. I'm not allowed to do that. So there are exceptions. Okay. So mixed economy is when um, you have a mixture of private property but regulations. Okay. So if you ask what kind of economy you have now, you would say it's a mixed economy. Okay. So there's a little picture for a mixed economy. So you've got a chef. He's got a little bit of public, a little bit of private, and he mixes it all together. And hopefully you get the benefit of everything, because under pure market economy, maybe the poor people don't get taken care of as much. So you have a little bit of public safety net. So you work it all together, and hopefully you have the best of all worlds, which is what the goal is. Okay. All right. So these are your notes. It's not that much, but this is something you need to know about. So when we reference it in the future, it'll make sense. Okay. So if somebody talks about another country and says, "Oh, they're communists," well, chances are they're not. Okay. They might be more command economy than we are, but not all the way. Okay. So those are your notes, and hopefully you're going to be ready for a quiz at some point coming up about some of these terms.